The X-Men have solved death and announced Krakoa to the world. But how does the world react to the X-Men? Welcome to the Comicstorian full story series, where we take trade paperbacks and single issues and break them down into digestible bites to help you understand. Then we read them dramatically back to you. All alterations to the panels, text, and images are to prevent copyright problems, and all art is owned by their respective companies. Today, I'm going to be bringing you guys the first 12 issues of the X-Men story by Gerry Duggan. This is the story of the first X-Men team that was voted on in the first Hellfire Gala. So, I hope you guys enjoy this telling of X-Men. And I apologize in advance at the cringy voices that I did during this video. Fei Long was a genius. He had grown up to be a genius and learned quickly that you can never trust anyone, not even the parents that raised him. But he reinvented himself and promised the world that he would claim Mars for humanity, going so far as to alter his body for this purpose. Now, he sits in his dark office. His eyes read the news that Mars has been claimed for the mutants and renamed Arakko. He smashes the case which holds a piece of Mars, wondering who will pay for this theft of his life. Them, he growls quietly. New York City, Central Park. A few days after the Hellfire Gala, a Krakoa treehouse sprouts up in a corner of Central Park. Ben Urich is walking towards the tree, spotting Cyclops talking with some kids and their parents who are admiring the new home. "Excuse me, Cyclops," Urich calls. He walks over and greets the mutants and begins to ask him some questions about the mutants' recent activities. After a few pleasant questions, Cyclops begins to turn away and walk through the portal. But Urich gets to the real reason that brought him there, asking about the supposedly dead mutants that seem to be up and alive. "Good night, Mr. Urich. It's been a pleasure," Scott calls over his shoulder as he steps through the portal. Inside, he is greeted by Jean Grey, who couldn't help but mentally overhear his conversation with the reporter. "Is he going to be a problem?" she asks him. Scott sighs. "I hope not. He's very talented," he says. But their conversation is interrupted by the X-Men's newest member as Polaris steps through the portal. "Hello? Anyone around to help with luggage?" she calls. Scott comes over to give her a hand. "We don't have, sidekicks or something?" she asks. He shakes his head and smiles. "Maybe next year. Let me show you around," he tells her. He leads her through the treehouse, with Polaris actually being impressed. "This is much cooler than I expected," she admits. Suddenly, everyone is linked up by Jean Grey. "I'm getting a telepathic wave of excitement from downtown. People are seeing a fireball in the sky. Rogue, can you do a flyby?" she asks. In the city, Rogue weaves through the buildings, looking up to see a fireball shifting course overhead. She flies up and hits it hard enough to alter its course, putting it into the bay. Getting to her feet nearby, she looks up to see a massive creature rising up from the impact crater. "Oh, he's much larger in person. Jean, you seeing this?" she asks. The monster swipes at her with a massive tentacle, knocking her away and slamming her through several buildings. In moments, the rest of the X-Men respond to the attack. "So, you've come to Earth to kick my friends?" Polaris asks as she lands and tries to manipulate the monster. But nothing happens, and her eyes widen. "Uh-oh. If it's metal, it's one that I can't control," she says. The tentacle comes at her, but Rogue swoops in and flies her away. The team regroups and prepares to attack, but the monster raises its head and a massive psychic wave lashes out at the city. Jean manages to shield everyone long enough for Polaris to create a metal barrier. They all begin to come up with ideas, but it is Sync that comes up with the best. "Yes, we must do this now," Sunfire says enthusiastically after Jean shares the plan with everyone's mind. They move quickly, with Polaris pulling all the metal they need from a nearby construction site. Sunfire powers up the massive creation, and from the smoke steps the X-Mech. The mech rushes forward and slams its fist into the monster, stopping the psychic attack. But the tentacles crush its arm. "Let me get some optics on the situation," Cyclops says as he fires his beams through the mech's front port. Sunfire hits it with a massive fireball next, but the monster suddenly pushes back against the mech and shocks it. But they still manage to wound it, and Wolverine gets ready. "I see it! We made a hole! Get me over there!" Laura shouts. She launches herself from the mech and flies through the wound that they made, her claws popping as she begins to slash at everything around her. "I'm gonna keep cutting until this thing's on its ass," she snarls. The creature quickly begins to fall, and the X-Men suddenly get word from the other heroes of New York that they are arriving. But the monster is already defeated, and the mech stands over it. One by one, the other heroes congratulate the X-Men on a job well done. Crowds gather and cheer them on as the mutants stand triumphant. Later, Synch studies the alien robot, but he is unable to figure out who launched it to attack Earth. Well, they swung and they missed, so we'd better be ready for whoever it was to swing again, Jean says as the team looks at the readouts. Elsewhere in the universe, on the planet known as Game World, gamblers watch as the pit boss moves the piece that represents their robot on Earth. "All bets are closed. The Mind Reaver's gambit against Earth has failed," he says. Those that lost throw down their chips, disappointed. But everyone turns as the casino's owner is brought to the stage. From an astronaut's corpse rises an alien fungus known as Cordyceps Jones. "Thank you! There's much to wager on, but I know the most popular tournament will be the Sol System. The contest is simple. Beat the Earthlings, but leave the planet. There's no sense in wasting a good planet. It'd be the perfect neighborhood if it weren't for the Earthlings," he says as he raises his glass and smiles. Meanwhile, deep beneath New Jersey, Dr. Stasis is still working. He must know the mutant secrets. He must figure out how they are resurrecting each other. Back on Game World, Cordyceps Jones stands before his gathered crowd. "Hey, is this mudball planet still kicking? Well, the night is young. Who's ready to throw some bones?" he calls as everyone cheers. Members of the Numari race step forward, offering to make a wager by sending one of their warriors with the Annihilation Wave to Earth. Jones nods his head, and the warriors board a craft and prepare to head to Earth. "Oh, I got a real good feeling about this roll," Cordyceps Jones says with a smile. Earth. A fireball flies out of the sky and slams into a field in Kansas. Two farmers go to look at what happened and are shocked to find an alien pulling itself from the crash. But the alien opens a strange bottle and drinks from it. The farmers rush back to their car as the alien drops to the ground. His body tears apart as massive insects begin to rip their way free of him. In New York, Jean and Synch are floating above the treehouse as Jean instructs Synch on how to use her psychic powers. But she suddenly turns her head. "Did you feel that? I felt those lives just snuff out," Synch says. Jean nods and orders the others to meet her at the Blackbird. The X-Men quickly fly to the scene of the attack in Kansas, shocked at the wave of massive insects that are quickly heading towards a small town. "X-Men, go!" Rogue orders as the team launches themselves from the plane. "The big one is mine," Wolverine shouts as she rushes at the largest of the monsters. Jean and Polaris land on the road and launch a logging truck and the massive trunks in its bed at the monsters, squashing a large amount of them. Rogue throws another log and Cyclops blasts it, peppering the bugs with massive splinters. But the creatures are still advancing towards the town, devouring everything in their path. "Okay, listen up, team. The more matter this wave eats, the bigger it gets. Sunfire, take the perimeter and hold it by any means necessary. Polaris, pop a bubble over the town, Scott orders. But Jean suddenly gets a mental ping from within the wave. She asks Sync to take Polaris's powers to protect the two while the two women head within the monster. As the other mutants continue to fight, the two head within the monster, with Polaris providing a shield that protects them. This is gross, Jean. What are we doing out here? Polaris asks as she watches the bugs squirm against her shield. Outside, the mutants are still fighting, with Sunfire burning everything and Scott firing his optic blasts. A gunshot takes out one of the bugs that he didn't even notice, and he turns to see several of the townsfolk helping them. Much obliged, Scott shouts and waves. Inside, Jean has found the corpse of the alien that arrived on Earth. She reaches out and can see the alien's final thoughts, and her eyes widen as she realizes what is happening. Sunfire, now! She mentally shouts, ordering Sunfire to completely burn the wave. Let me know if it gets too hot. I'm not gonna hold back, he says as he completely burns the wave apart outside the shield. Afterwards, the X-Men gather and make sure that everything is dead. With this done, they begin to head out, but the townsfolk have gathered. Where are you going, X-Men? A big man says, a shotgun over his shoulder. But he smiles and holds out a hand. You saved the whole damn town. You gotta stay for a bite, he offers. The X-Men smile back and agree to stay for a meal, joining the small town in a cookout. Sometime later, the X-Men stand ready as a vast spaceship descends towards them. I gotta warn you, if this is who I think it is, Sunfire's gonna have an easier time keeping cool than me, Rogue whispers to Scott. Scott nods and frowns. He's never been subtle, has he? He says. Sorry, but who are we talking about out here? Polaris asks the rest of the group. But the spaceship lands and out steps the High Evolutionary, flanked by his animal hybrids and his daughter. The High Evolutionary smiles at them all. The birth of Arakko is a great leap forward for your evolution. I come in peace as a friend to mutantdom to commemorate this momentous occasion, he says. If Arakko's on your mind, you're on the wrong planet, Cyclops points out. But the High Evolutionary's daughter, Luminous, steps forward and offers her father's gift. A golden ball floats over her hand. Looks cool. What's it do? Polaris says. The High Evolutionary explains that the Nihility Sphere will heal the Earth, but make humans unable to reproduce. Within a generation, your human problem will simply cease to be, he says. But Rogue isn't interested in any more discussion, and she launches forward and punches the High Evolutionary in the face, knocking him away. That man kidnapped and tortured me, X-Men. The good news is that he can take a Hulk-level beating, so none of us need to hold back, she snaps. Polaris doesn't hesitate and creates a metal fist for herself, launching forward and punching Luminous. The rest of the X-Men join into combat with the High Evolutionary's guard. Cyclops and Wolverine fight the guard as Jean manages to seal off the Nihility Sphere, while Sync and Sunfire burn the High Evolutionary's skin off. But the villain quickly begins to heal and reaches out, grabbing Sunfire by the throat. I thought Rogue's ability to mimic mutant powers was impressive, but you are more powerful by no small magnitude, he says to Sync as he throws Sunfire to the earth below. Cyclops and Wolverine are still fighting, but the High Evolutionary Guard is slowly overwhelming them. Luminous has also returned, flying forward and slamming into Polaris, knocking her away. Luminous continues forward, slamming into Wolverine. But Sync is there suddenly, absorbing her powers and fighting against her. He hits her hard and slams her into the ground. Pack this up, High Evolutionary, or you face the X-Men and their greatest weapon, Sync shouts. But the High Evolutionary merely snaps his fingers, and Sync suddenly loses Luminous's powers. Except I can simply nullify my gifts to her, and your theft of them. Fear not, I will not punish you harshly, he says before ordering his evolutionary guard to stand down. He offers to withdraw from the planet in exchange for a drop of Sync's blood. But Laura steps in the way, still prepared to fight. But Sync finally agrees. He offers the blood to the High Evolutionary, who immediately turns to leave. Wait, earlier you said Araco caused some dominoes to fall. Is one of them this thing? Jean says as she lands and creates a mental projection of Cordyceps Jones that she took from the corpse in the Annihilation Wave. The High Evolutionary nods. Cordyceps Jones, a lower form of fungal life. You can find him on Game World, the villain says, before taking his forces and departing. Meanwhile, on Coney Island, Ben Urich is sitting on a park bench in the rain, waiting on his contact. The man steps from the darkness of the night and offers him a folder, asking Ben Urich to tell the truth. You've already got the story. It's just bigger than you think it is, he says. Urich's eyes widen in shock as he begins to learn the truth, and his contact turns away. I look forward to reading about mutant resurrection in the Daily Bugle, he calls over his shoulder. Halloween, the X-Men's treehouse within Central Park. Inside, Scott Summers sleeps next to his wife, but he tosses and turns as nightmares fill his mind. Unknown to him, the demon known as Nightmare stands at the foot of his bed, smiling as he drinks in the nightmares of the mutant. Drifting from the treehouse, he begins to fly over the city, taking in all the different nightmares that feed him. But he drifts once more to the treehouse and settles in next to Scott and Jean. A tree ripe with nightmares. And these two are the peaches, he says with a smile. Scott continues to toss and turn, his eyes glowing beneath his sleep mask as he sees his worst fears of not being enough for anyone, of dying, and the world telling him that he was wrong. Jean walks through the halls of Xavier's school, also not good enough, mocked by Emma Frost. Nightmare's smiles broader. A little lost girl, a child soldier, and then the host of the Phoenix. A little genocide does keep one up at night, he says. He floats away, coming to Laura's room, where she pops her claws in a sleep filled with anger and fear. But suddenly, Nightmare is grabbed and yanked away. He turns to see the mental image of Jean Grey. Unhand me, woman! Nightmare shouts. But Jean glares at him. You will be quiet while I throw you out of here, she snaps as she slaps him across the face. She rises up and explains to him that she is an Omega-level mutant, but it is her love and kindness that make her strong. You sanctimonious witch! Nightmare begins to scream, but he is launched from the treehouse. Above the city, he calls his dark steed. Mutants! Humans! You are all insects! I am a nightmare, and I shall murder sleep forever if I choose, he bellows. Across the city, his powers shoot out like a wave, causing many to be lost in their nightmares. Do you hear me down there, Marvel girl? You've made an enemy tonight, Nightmare bellows. I hear you, even all the way up here, Jean says in his mind. Nightmare looks up to see a massive Jean standing over him. You are small, demon, she says. Suddenly, there are multiple Jeans walking towards Nightmare, who looks around in fear. I am not weaker than you, and shame on you for taking advantage of Doctor Strange's death to come creeping around, pretending you own the place, she says. She slaps the demon horse on the back and causes it to sprint away into the night. leaving the city to return to a peaceful slumber. "Sweet dreams, everyone," she says with a whisper into their minds. Returning to the treehouse, she finds that Scott has awakened. "I see I'm not the only one who is having trouble sleeping," he says to his wife with a smile. "Scott, sleep is for the weak," she whispers as she wraps her arms around him. Meanwhile, Ben Urich is moving through a graveyard at night, and he isn't shocked to find that the grave of Nathan Summers has been dug up and the body is missing. He reaches down and writes a note in his pad. Time passes, and Ben Urich goes to see Scott Summers once again, finding the X-Men passing out food to the homeless outside their treehouse. He asks to speak with Scott privately, and the two go for a walk. "That man is dangerous," Jean says as she watches them walk away. "Which one?" Emma asks. As Ben and Scott walk through the city, Ben lets Scott know that he has evidence of the mutant's resurrection. "I don't know how yet, but mutantdom has solved death. Isn't that right?" Ben asks. Scott stares at him for a moment, speechless. "You understand, it doesn't just give you a nation, it gives you dominion," Ben says. He turns to walk away, telling Scott that he'll contact him tomorrow if he would like to make a comment. More time passes, and events rock the X-Men. But in New York City, snow falls. Two little girls look up at a cat stuck in a tree, unsure of what to do, but knowing that they can't leave it there all night. "What's his name?" a voice calls as it floats down and picks up the cat. "Joe," the little girl says in surprise. "That's a good name," the new superhero says with a smile as he hands them the cat and flies away. He continues to work in the city, saving people from fires and car accidents. He's stopped by Spider-Man, who welcomes him to the city and asks his name. But the hero doesn't have an answer for him. Later, Sunfire looks up into the sky as the Sword Station orbiting Earth warns the mutants of Feilong launching his fleet towards Mars. As soon as he touches down on Arakko, "I'll escort him back through a gate to Earth," Sunfire tells them. He launches himself into space, quickly catching up to the fleet. He follows Feilong's ship, which breaks away and steers towards Phobos, one of the many moons of Mars. "Feilong to Earth. The dragon has landed," Feilong says as he radios back to Orcus on Earth. He steps from his ship, prepared to start the first human colony in space. But he steps back as Sunfire flares in front of him and lands. "Feilong, I'm sorry you came all this way, but I'm here to escort you back to Earth," Sunfire says. But Feilong shakes his head. "I can make my own way back to Earth, in my own time. You may go now," he says as the rest of his fleet begins to land behind him. Sunfire steps forward, trying to convince the genius that establishing a colony on Phobos will be seen as provocation by the mutants on Arakko. Mars. The planet below is Mars, and I couldn't care less whom I upset, Feilong says as he turns away and activates his wrist computer. Sunfire sighs and reaches a hand out for Feilong, preparing to drag him back to Earth. But below them, Iska and the mutant known as Vornak look to the moon. "What a brave little human making camp at our planet's doorstep," Iska says with a smile. Vornak growls and stretches his wings, lifting his axe as he leaps into the air and promises to destroy Feilong. In moments, he lands on Phobos, glaring down at Sunfire and Feilong. "I am Vornak. It was my axe that cleaved the head of a Menti goddess of pain," he growls. Sunfire holds up a hand. "I am Sunfire of Krakoa, and I'm handling this situation," he says. But Feilong still claims Phobos for humans. "Excellent! A contest!" best, Vornak shouts as he swings his axe. But Sunfire and Feilong dodge out of the way. Sunfire blasts the axe, destroying it, and orders Vornak to stand down. The two continue to trade blows until Vornak turns his sight on Feilong. "I admire you, human. You traveled far and died well," the mutant shouts as he rushes at Feilong. But Feilong opens his mouth and a blast of energy rips forth, destroying the top half of Vornak's body and leaving it to lay on the ground. "My God, what have you done?" Sunfire asks in shock. Sunfire has no choice but to leave Phobos. It doesn't take long for Feilong to create his colony, radioing back to Orcus that it was a huge success. Meanwhile, humans have gathered outside X-Men's treehouse, leaving mementos to mourn the loss of Cyclops, who gave his life for the city. Captain Krakoa lands outside and enters the treehouse, where Scott drops the visual camouflage. He is unhappy about having to hide his identity. Later, he heads into the city in his civilian clothes. He decides that he needs to say something to Yurik. He dials a payphone and gets the reporter at his office. "Mr. Yurik, I'm a friend of Scott Summers. He told me about the story you're working on, about the mutants. I have some things I'd like to say, and was wondering if we could meet to discuss the matter," Scott says. But Yurik has no idea what he is talking about, informing him that he doesn't know what he's talking about and that he isn't working on any story about mutants. "I've never met your friend Cyclops, but he seems like a good guy. My condolences to you," Ben says. Scott hangs up the phone, surprised and confused. Days ago, Dr. Stasis steps down from his lab and greets the chimera animals that he has created. "Today is the day we spoke about. The Great War will begin before the sun sets. Earth will remember the blow that you brave chimeras strike against mutantdom today," he says. He offers the creatures glasses of champagne and toasts them. But the monsters don't realize that the liquid sends them into a blood frenzy, and he sends them out into the city. "Go, my friends, make war! I must have his body on a slab by dusk," Stasis calls as the monsters rush through the sewers, the tunnels echoing with their animalistic screeches. After the battle, Scott is awakened from his egg, where he is greeted by Emma. He sighs and tells her that he should get going, that the X-Men will need him. But she shakes her head and looks at him sadly. "Scott, you cannot possibly return to the treehouse. It was very public," she tells him. He asks her to show him, but she informs him that she's avoided all the news. "I need to know, and I need to get back to the X-Men," he tells her as he stands and walks out of the chamber. Earlier, the Chimeras attack the city, coming up from beneath the streets. But the X-Men arrive to save the day, though they are under strength with Jean, Rogue, and Polaris on Araco. Cyclops lands on a nearby car and lashes out with his optic blasts, cutting through several of the monsters. Wolverine draws her claws and snarls at another of the creatures, causing it to run away in fear. In a nearby alley, Dr. Stasis watches from his command center. "Damn it! We're not getting what we need," he whispers before turning to his personal chimera assistant and ordering him to head into the street. The creature known as Bornin grabs hold of a baby and rushes forward. "Out of my way, One Eye!" he shouts as he rushes at Cyclops. But Cyclops' eye glows red. "Never! Now gently hand the baby over," Cyclops growls. Bornin throws the baby and rushes forward. Cyclops leaps for the child, not even feeling the claws slash across him. He lands gently and gives the baby back to its mother before he stumbles. The blood rushed down his neck. Cyclops stumbles and falls into a nearby pile of trash. But luckily, there's an ambulance driver already there. Ooh, that looks bad. There's good news and bad news. The good news is it wasn't a complete cut of your carotid artery, Dr. Stasis says, leaning over Cyclops in his disguise. And he reaches down with a scalpel. The bad news is, now it is, he says as he slashes through Scott's throat. He leans down and smiles. Let's try a little experiment. I'm going to tell you exactly where to find me, and let's see if you can remember when you come back. He whispers into Scott's ear. He gets up quickly as Wolverine approaches. I'm sorry, there was nothing we could do for him, he tells her as he gets back into his ambulance. And Wolverine kneels over Scott's body, crying for his death. Much later, Dr. Stasis stands in his lab once again, proud of his work. MODOK looks down at the petri dish of plague that he has created and smiles. He is proud of his work. The virus attacks the part of the brain that controls fight or flight. Testing it on the cruise ship has given him all the data he needs, as he and his AIM drones watch the people tear each other apart. AIM thanks everyone on this cursed tub for donating their lives. For science! He shouts as he kicks one of the rage zombies away. Meanwhile, the Blackbird approaches. MODOK really yelled for science? Cyclops asks Wolverine after she briefs him, and she nods. Somebody was live streaming aboard the ship before the comms went down, she explains. As they get closer, Polaris looks up and tells them that a ship is hovering overhead. But it seems to be psi-shielded. The rest of the X-Men disembark as Rogue steers the Blackbird to engage with MODOK's ship. Cyclops isn't happy about it, but he transforms himself into Captain Krakoa, since Scott Summers is still dead. The heroes leap down onto the ship, quickly trying to get the rage-filled cruise-goers under control. As they continue to fight, Laura looks to Synch and finally asks him about their time together in the vault. He finally admits to her that they had a relationship, but that it took almost 200 years before she finally warmed up to him. Broke me down that fast? She asked with a smile as she tosses another shipgoer. She turns to the approaching AIM drones. Well, I admire patience in a partner. Ask me again sometime. There are more beekeepers dead ahead, she says. There's the sound of combat in the next room, and she finally pops her head out. You are not going to believe what I found, she says with a smile. Synch sticks his head into the room, and the two find themselves looking at MODOK as he enjoys the buffet. The food is the only reason to step foot on these filthy tubs, he tells them. Synch steps forward and demands to know why MODOK did all of this to these innocent people. But MODOK just shrugs. Because I could, for science, and eventually a tidy profit, he says with a smile. Luckily, the X-Men have managed to save everyone they could. Wolverine steps forward and pops her claws. But MODOK uses his power to blast her into the ocean. He falls back as Synch hits him with a psychic blast. I could kill you with a thought, he warns. But MODOK grits his teeth. Perhaps, but MODOK has psi shields, and I think you're missing a call from your friend. She says glob glob global, he says. Synch knows that he is right, and he turns his attention back to Laura, who he pulls from the ocean. MODOK blasts off, heading up to his ship. I bid you adieu. Let this one go, mutants. I know where you live. He laughs as he rockets away. But Captain Krakoa suddenly slams into him and knocks him back to the ship, and he floats over the killing robot. Synch, I'd like a private word with MODOK. Can you dial me in? Scott asks. No! Stay out of my head, MODOK groans. In moments, Scott finds himself in MODOK's mind, where he finds the mad scientist at a suburban home, having a cookout with his family. MODOK doesn't seem upset by everything he's done, and Scott warns him that if he continues, they will find him. We know where you live too, he warns. Victorious, the X-Men give MODOK over to the US government. As they all return to the Blackbird, Laura continues to eat from the plate she took from the buffet. MODOK was right. The buffet is undefeated, she tells her teammates. Later that night, Scott sits in the branches of the treehouse, looking down on the park as Captain Krakoa. He is approached by Synch, who finally tells him that it was he who wiped Ben Urich's memories. I didn't know how you were going to handle Ben, and then you fell and didn't get a chance, so I acted, he explains. Don't apologize for trying to do the right thing. I've done far worse and accomplished much less while trying to protect our family, Scott explains. But Synch thinks it's worse than that, and he holds out a notebook to Scott. I asked for his notebook. It wasn't until later that I looked at them and realized what I snatched from Ben, Synch tells him. Scott flips through the notes and realizes that Ben saw mutantdom and Krakoa as immortal, as the miracles of Earth. Synch finally stands and offers to leave the team for his actions. But Scott shakes his head. I'd say you're finished when Captain Krakoa says you are, he tells him simply. High above Arakko, Dr. Stasis looks down on the planet before returning to those he works with in Orcus, explaining to them that survival is at stake with their war with the mutants of Krakoa. I've had an epiphany about the mutants' greatest vulnerability, he says, telling the group about MODOK's recent battle with the X-Men. I have some of the science from the bodies he's dropped, but I would like to free him from prison and enjoin him to our cause, he says. And Nimrod steps forward. I would like to meet this killing machine, he says. A short time later, Nimrod cuts through the forces guarding the secret prison beneath Area 51. He rips through the wall to MODOK's cell and destroys the guards in War Machine armor. The area is secured, Doctor, Nimrod calls. Dr. Stasis leans inside the destroyed building. Hello, MODOK. So nice to meet you, he says. He steps inside and offers MODOK a job as he frees him. I'm offering you a position. Don't worry, it's not long-term or even a full-time one. We have a goal, and when we're successful, not only will you get to kill many people, you'll also help retake the planet. Life is too short to spend all of it fighting mutants, right? Dr. Stasis says. Now freed, MODOK floats close to Stasis and smiles. I'm intrigued. Tell me more, he says. Meanwhile, on Arakko, Storm has called the planet's council to meet, asking if they should return to make war with Amenth. While the vote is no, Storm also brings up returning to Otherworld to rescue Redroot. The former speaker of Arakko was captured during the tournament there. She doesn't call for a vote, though she would like volunteers to rescue the mutant. With this stated, she turns and walks out of the room. Meanwhile, Rogue and Gambit head to Obidus, a patchwork moon forged from scavenged ships, hoping to find the location of Game World. But what they find is Destiny, who informs her daughter that the thugs and mercenaries of Obidus don't have the location of Game World. But Rogue and Gambit get into a bar brawl. Shaking her head, Destiny heads to the bar and starts to drink, pointing out to Gambit while the fight is going on how she doesn't believe that he's good enough for her daughter. After the fight, Rogue walks over to her mother. You were right, Irene. These bums didn't know anything. Let's go, she says to Gambit before walking out of the room. Gambit leans on the bar, picking up a cold bottle of booze that didn't shatter. We both love her, Irene, but the difference is, my love don't come with no strings attached, Gambit says before turning and walking away. Destiny watches him for a moment before making strangling motions. Hate you, she whispers in frustration. Back on Arakko, Storm goes to visit Sunfire, who offers to show her something on his land. I brought a Mizunara oak sapling with me from Japan and planted it on the night I was elected to the X-Men. Arakko has given it special consideration, he tells her. He leads her around the house he is building and shows her the tree that Arakko has grown, showing the face of Redroot. It seems our hostess is asking for help, she says. She looks to Shiro and tells him about the other world. I think Arakko is asking you to help find her voice, she says. On Arakko, Rogue sits upon a hillside and loads the special gun that Forge gave her. Phobos rotates around the planet again, and she fires. The gun fires a special bullet that allows Forge to completely map out the base that Orcus has built on Phobos, which allows them to secretly observe the installation. The X-Men go over the map, but it is Sync who points to a strange signal. Hang on, what's this here? Is it a mutant? He asks. Rogue nods. Yeah, it's Nightcrawler's body, she says. He died on Phobos saving Arakko prior to Fei Long's landing, and his remains now appear to be part of the decor, Shiro explains. The Wolverine steps forward and points out that there is also a hint of adamantium on the installation. Jean believes that it is one of Logan's skeletons, but Laura shakes her head. No, there's one alive. It's a smaller amount of metal, enough to say a woman or a child, and it's in a box, she says as she begins to pull on her mask. Everyone asks her to slow down, but she glares at them. Try and stop me, she snaps. It was the next day that Laura cut her way out of the shipping container that she was hiding on. The team had taken bets on how long it would take for her to be spotted. She wondered if they would do that if Logan was taking the mission. But Scott had just smiled. He'd have opened the betting, he told her. She slips through the hallways of the Orcus base, hiding from the guards until she finally reaches the holding cell. She isn't sure if it is one of her sisters, one of the other clones that was created from Logan's DNA. She doesn't want to take the chance. Finding the stasis box, she opens it and is shocked at what she finds. Lady Deathstrike rears up from within, roaring with rage. Where's stasis? She bellows, slashing at Laura with her claws. Laura blocks the attack and jumps back. Hang on, Deathstrike. You're a prisoner of, she begins, but Deathstrike isn't listening. Of the X-Men? He traded me to Krakoa? She asks. Laura tries to talk some sense into her, but Deathstrike doesn't listen and launches into another attack. Wolverine finally gets annoyed and pops her claws. I tried the easy way, she growls. She blocked an attack and kicked Deathstrike in the stomach, stabbing her with her foot claws. Listen, I thought you were someone else. Now listen and heal up, she says. But Deathstrike falls to the floor. I can't, she gasps. She looks up, informing Laura that she is dying from the metal on her skeleton. It's poisoning you. I've seen it before. It'll be the end of us all, Laura tells her. She reaches out her hand, offering to help Lady Deathstrike, and the two of them begin to head for the exits. But as they enter another chamber, a voice greets them over the intercom. I turned the lights back on to find the cockroaches scurrying about, he says. At their base, Jean is aware that Wolverine has been discovered, and Polaris collects her winnings. Fei Long hits a button and opens the windows to their chamber, sucking Wolverine and Lady Deathstrike into space. Laura tries to grab onto the floor with her claws. Jean, if you can hear me, he's venting us into space. Ask Rogue how she is at catching fastball specials, Laura shouts in her mind. Rogue is instantly up, flying across the planet at supersonic speed. She passes through a gate to Araco and barrels off the planet, asking Jean to guide her to Laura's floating body. She catches the two mutants and quickly takes them back to Krakoa, where they are allowed to heal within the gardens. And Sync greets them with Chinese food from their favorite restaurant in New York. Afterwards, Laura invites Deathstrike to stay with them and join them for Chinese. But she refuses, knowing that Krakoa isn't the place for her. Later, Rogue reaches out to the one friend she knows has information on Gameworld. She puts through the call and smiles at the image of Rocket Raccoon. "I need to talk about Gameworld," she says with a smile as she leans forward. He looks around nervously.
Gameworld, huh? I'm guessing this is about a high-stakes game that I, don't know anything about. I don't know why you think I'd know about this place. I mean, that place. What do you want to know?
He asks her, trying to keep his voice down so the others at the table don't hear him talking. Later, the patrons of Gameworld turn in shock as the ladies of the X-Men walk into the room, dressed to kill. The floor manager steps forward. "Welcome, friends. What to do first, ladies? The spas, the shopping?" he asks. Rogue smiles and opens a box to reveal a crystal within. "We're here for gambling, sugar," she says. The manager nods and tells them that he will give them the most generous line of credit and wishes them luck. "We make our own luck," Laura hisses as the ladies walk by him and into the casino. The ladies look around in shock at the amount of aliens that are gambling around them. "Well, Rocket was right on the money. This place sure is something," Rogue says. Polaris nods and tells them to stick to the plan. "Okay, have fun. I'm off to the scrapper," Laura says with a nod. The women all separate, heading to their designated stations. But Polaris gets distracted as she sees a green dress. "Ooh, I have a few minutes," she tells herself. Back on Earth, Sync and Scott have headed into the sewers beneath New York, hunting down leads to Scott's death. They find the path splits and they separate in the darkness. On Gameworld, Laura lurks in the shadows above as the guards pass by. She lands on the ground, creating just enough sound to be caught. The guards whirl on her and a strange voice comes out. "Hey, Toots! Nice to meet ya! You didn't think you could land on Gameworld and hide your adamantium, did you?" Cordyceps Jones asks. He smiles at her as he lets his spores slip through the air and take control of her body. "Now, be a dear and introduce me to your friends," he says. On Earth, Sync steps through a tunnel and finds Bornin putting the bodies of the chimeras into an incinerator. "I guess Mr. Stasis is getting rid of the evidence," Sync says. And the monster glares at Sync. "Forgive me if I don't tuck a tail for every mutant pretending to be Wolverine," Bornin hisses before launching himself at Sync. But Sync pops the claws that he borrowed from Laura and launches into the fight. He slashes through Bornin quickly and leaves the dead monster on the ground. Back on Gameworld, Polaris and Rogue are creating a distraction as Jean finds her way to the high-stakes table, where the aliens are still betting on the destruction of Earth. "Ladies and gentlemen, you've had your fun. You've battered my home for your amusement, trying to kill us off and break our planet apart to fund this grotesque palace I stand in. If you stay at this table and you seek to profit off the demise of my home, then you gamble more than you realize, and none of you are safe," she says to the assorted aliens that stand before her. Someone makes a snide comment, but Jean breaks his hand with her mind. She orders the aliens to run and turns back to the tables. "Show yourself, Cordyceps Jones," she orders. A voice calls to her immediately. "Here I am, Red. In fact, I'm all around you," he says. Jean looks in shock to find Laura overtaken by the alien fungus. I got your friend right here, and she has come to see things my way, he explains. Laura leaps forward to attack, but Jean throws her to the side. You think everyone is afraid of me now? Wait till I've got the former Phoenix wrapped around my little finger, Jones says as his spores fill the room. On Earth, Scott comes out of the tunnel, finding Dr. Stasis sitting at his bank of computers and reading the newspaper. Nice to have you here, Captain Krakoa, Stasis says, seemingly unsurprised by this turn of events. He reaches for his cane and draws a blade from it. No need for the charades down here, Cyclops. You X-Men won't be able to mess with my mind as long as I'm wearing my mask, he says. But Scott explains there is no one here to mess with Stasis's mind. You came to fight your nemesis alone? You know, it didn't go so well for you the last time we were alone together, Stasis points out. He takes a swing with the blade, but Scott ducks underneath it and punches him in the face. He ducks under another attack by Stasis. You people are a disease spreading from a bloated tumor on an island. And by my surgeon's hand, you will be excised, he shouts, bringing the blade down towards Scott's face. But Cyclops blocks the attack and holds the blade steady. I've heard it all before, he says, before blasting Stasis in the face. The helmet shatters as the villain is knocked aside, but Scott's eyes widen as he sees the face beneath the mask. You, he gasps, and the face of Nathan Essex looks back at him and smiles. I'm sorry, have we met? He asks. Scott doesn't hesitate, and he launches forward and punches Sinister in the face. You know what never gets old? Beating Sinister, he shouts. After I'm done with you, I'm going to walk to Krakoa and dunk your puppet master into a volcano, Scott says. But Sinister just smiles as he crawls away. You think I'm the puppet? He asks. He whirls on Scott and tries to attack him. That strutting monstrosity is just a failed experiment that polluted themselves with your vile genes, he says. But Scott dodges the attack and grabs him in a headlock. Interesting. So you think you're the original Sinister? Scott asks. Sinister says that he is the original Nathaniel Essex, and if Scott doesn't let him go, he'll detonate the explosives in the ceiling. Scott looks up as Sync walks in, and the ceiling explodes over their heads. You lunatic! Scott shouts. The mutants are blocked off from Sinister, who promises them that he will destroy Krakoa before turning away and leaving through a secret exit. Watch your backs, Essex, all of them, Scott shouts before he and Sync head out of the sewers. On Game World, Laura launches another attack at Jean. Rogue rushes over, yelling for Laura to stop, but Wolverine roars in rage and stabs her. Polaris is suddenly there, also now controlled. She uses her powers to put a shield around Rogue and begins to squash her. Cordyceps Jones laughs from his chair and drinks his cocktail. Ha! Now, will someone finally kill their planet? The water alone is worth a fortune, he shouts. But he suddenly stops as a realization dawns on him. Ah, crud. That red-headed dame is just showing me what I want to see. Yeah, flark me. I can hear the psi alarms now, he says. The image shimmers and shifts, and Jean is standing over Jones as she continues to siphon the spores out of Laura and everyone else's bodies. Cordyceps is awake a little earlier than I'd like. I still have work to do, she says, turning to Rogue, who siphons her powers and begins to help her. Jean continues to suck the spores from people's bodies, and Polaris wraps them up in a shield. What are you doing to me? That's literally my body, Jones shouts. But Laura is there with her claws to his throat. Let them do their thing, or I have to do mine, and your day will get even worse, she says. She tosses the fungus away. Now let's throw him into one of those black holes and hit the buffet, she says. But Jean refuses, wanting to put the alien into prison. Polaris nods and creates a cage so that the spores can't escape.
I was only doing business, you crazy broads,
Jones shouts. And it was only personal for us, Laura growls at him. With their mission complete, the X-Ladies turn back to the casino. To those that were under Cordycep's control, Jean declares them free, and that Game World is now under their control. Back on Earth, Sync and Cyclops meet with Ben Urich, telling him about how they had erased his memories. They tell him the truth about mutant resurrection. You were right. Mutantdom has solved death. I can't talk about the technology, and unfortunately, it only works for mutants. I can't stress that enough, Scott tells him. They offer to give Ben back his memories, but the reporter refuses, wishing instead to write the story now as he knows it. He thanks them for their time and gets up to leave. It might be hard on you all for a while, Ben tells them over his shoulder. But Scott and Sync just smile. What else is new? Sync says. And so, the news of the immortal mutants break over the world. Cyclops is sure he'll be removed from the X-Men for leaking it, but he believed the world deserved to know. Meanwhile, on Phobos, Sinister steps through the portal from Earth. You look terrible, Stasis, Fei Long notes. MODOK sits next to him.
Mutants again?
He asks. Sinister nods and puts down his case on the console. Unfortunate that we didn't get to hang the mutants with a lie. But humanity will beg us yet to kill them all, he says. He smiles evilly as he looks at his compatriots. I trust our friend is ready for her debut at the Mutie Gala. Let the fall of the mutants commence, he says. And so brings us to the conclusion of the first 12 issues of X-Men. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I enjoyed reading it. I really hope you were able to get through those voices I did a little bit there, because I was a little unsure with them myself. But if you did enjoy this video, please be sure to give it a like, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below, and be sure to click that bell icon so that you get notifications when new videos go live, because sometimes YouTube doesn't send those out. And if you want to support us even further, you can do that with YouTube memberships or go to our Patreon at patreon.com/Comicstorian. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.